we live out from the high school is in Greenfield. We keep going extra. We have a lot of like it's just as far as the regular school district comes to so we worked out we've met some families and we worked out a deal where a couple of months takes up some more to make some school. And then vice versa, I'm thinking about Trader Road. Right now my daughter's doing swimming, so she's lady that and it's 5 o'clock in the morning Friday. So late, but fortunately one of the moms is a morning person, so she picks up 4 or 5 girls from our community and takes them to there and then brings them to school in the morning and one of us all them up. It's kind of divided out. It's worked out well so far. I mean, there's always somebody. Just good communication. They have a nice parent website. Hey, my son needs to ride to soccer practice. Or we're here and you can get there and it works out really well. But they have a 4-year schedule. They have a math all year long. They'll come and they teach a lot of things together. They have to take that. They start doing freshman, they gotta have 3 years after 4 years in high school, which is great. And we didn't realize how bad city school was until it was actually our kids were behind. But some it was harder for him to do.
Mine was for married, so
I did get homework and stuff.
only if married, so
there was a small print. The grades, the grades were just too easy. I mean, that's great. High school, you know, because of college.
Well, if you want to step in there,
Yeah. My son's advanced in math.
I don't know what he's off specific Oklahoma or
Yeah, what is it?
I mean, we just had his evaluation in Oklahoma.
There you go.
Teacher Tuesday.
Should be, yeah.
I can't spell dogs.
So he has probably
I have to write it down. I can do it now. I have to write it down. Everything, read the one sentence.
Yep.
Okay, we draw that and write it down.
Yeah, I was saying my reading. I scored. Good enough to get into school I wanted to, but still it was just like,
They went on my complete English score.
back then you got 200 points to sign your name, right?
I know. I did better in Spanish than I did English.
I believe so. I just plugged in and is there a clicker or I'll just stand I guess and use the
I'm not bringing this through this week, so
Mac just use it.
Molly, you're interested in this presentation?
am I interested? Very interested.
I'll just use
That is right answer.
Those things your people, right?
Better be so then. That's not a good look if I'm not interested.
there it comes now.
Molly, this is Kenny.
Oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am. I'm not good at technology.
Is anybody in it? Do you have a clicker?
No, it's like
I was over at the communication center, now I'm over at
Stand over here.
a whole bunch of other technology projects.
Is there any way we can do it?
He's probably that teacher.
And I'm not even in IT.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay. Anything else for you?
He's got
I'll
money.
let you start whenever you're ready. All
I'll bring
right.
you along.
yeah, I didn't know if I should wait another minute.
I'll bring you along. We're gonna help each other out.
I haven't been to the political mic.
What I might do is close this back.
Start explaining to them now what they're going to be needing and all this and realize that they're having
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to her about
Cut down some of that roller.
That's why I just got put over.
Okay.
Welcome to my nightmare.
Yeah, we can chat more about it. We have a lot of local government customers we're talking to them about all that.
We'll be able to grow.
They'll come and do a presentation. Got together, maybe a couple of months, and
Yeah.
brought it all out for them. They really.
Is that thing recording? There's a camera like right there. Is that the? CNN, right?
Yep.
Good morning. Can you all hear me okay? Do I need to speak into the mic or? Yeah. Good morning. Thanks for being here so early. My name is Brian Moran, and I'm a senior sales engineer at Davenport Group. The topic that I'm speaking about today is probably not the most exciting thing going on in the data center, but I do believe it to be one of the most critical. So backup and business continuity solutions. So I'm from Oklahoma. Last time I was in North Carolina, I flew in on the day of Monday, September 11th. So if you all remember what was going on that week, it was Hurricane Irma. So, you know, we were all kind of paying attention to these 2-hour updates, trying to figure out what was going to happen across the state. You know, thankfully, I think North Carolina was spared from, you know, most of the, I don't know, welcome, come on in, take a seat. Front row, seating available, prime real estate. So yeah, so I mean, as we all know now, I mean, North Carolina was spared from most of, you know, the damage that had been forecasted just a few days before. But you know, in my role at Davenport Group, I get to work with companies all across the country. We have quite a few customers in Texas and Florida that you know, some of them only had to, you know, prolong power outages, but more than one did have to cope with, you know, floodwaters in their data center. So, you know, while again, it may not be one of the most exciting things, I believe having a not only solid backups, but a true kind of business continuity strategy is one of the most critical investments today. So my presentation, I'm going to be talking about kind of the art of the possible and specific technologies that are available already today that you can deploy if you're not already using something. But before I get into kind of the art of the possible, I want to talk about the current state of backup as I see it. Did you say this is you?
That looks like my old server room. It's a lot cleaner now.
So, as I mentioned before, in my role, I get to work with businesses all across the country, from like rural, you know, very sparsely populated cities to Fortune 500 businesses from coast to coast. I've seen nearly every iteration of backup imaginable. Just recently, I was working with a customer that had 8 months worth of snapshots on their production storage array, and that was their form of backup. So, right, so I mean, just eight months worth of snapshots on their array. Managing snapshots is difficult, especially if you're trying to find a lost file, you know. So I also have seen customers that have already invested in some sort of backup software, but then they use the same primary production storage array as the backup destination. So, I mean, both strategies do work, but really I would not consider either to be a proper business continuity solution. Is anyone familiar with the company OVH? So I hadn't heard of them myself either until April of this year. Back in April, they announced their intentions to acquire VMware's vCloud Air business. So vCloud Air is now actually an OVH company. So they're founded in 1999. They're actually one of Europe's largest hosting providers. They have 20 data centers and support over 18 million websites. In June, just a few months ago, they reported a leak in one of their liquid cooling systems in a Paris data center. So this liquid cooling system basically dripped directly on top of a production storage array. If that had happened, you know, to the customer that was using snapshots only as their only form of backup, I mean, the loss would have been catastrophic. I mean, OVH had redundant copies of data and they were able to restore, but 50,000 websites were offline for a full 24 hours. Excuse me. So I know as government entities, you manage a very diverse and wide set of applications. I'm going to illustrate this next point with a triangle. I made this slide. At the tip of the triangle, typically making up the smallest percentage of your overall workloads are truly tier 0 type workloads. Unlike most of the private sector, I mean, your tier 0 workloads can actually have life and death consequences from any amount of downtime and require 0 RPO and 0 RTO type solutions to make sure they stay up and running. Making up a larger percentage of workloads, you know, these databases, email, they may not have the same uptime requirements, but they can still pose absolutely, you know, difficult backup challenges. What I see deployed, you know, for the, well, first, okay, so let me back up. For the top tier of applications, I'm going to be talking about what I see customers doing both locally and then even across distance, leveraging like stretch cluster type technology. So I'm going to get into that. This kind of middle tier, like I said, may not require the same amount of uptime as your tier 0 workloads, but you know, a lot of folks have complex databases that span multiple volumes or multiple LUNs, and so you want a way to have some sort of consistency across LUNs to ensure recoverability. You know, I work with a lot of folks that also have to deal with legal holds or e-discovery type requests. A lot of times this kind of main workload is adequately protected just on a nightly schedule using either a dedicated or purpose-built backup appliance, not snapshots on the primary storage array. Snapshots, though, are perfect for augmenting this type of backup because most backup software is designed to only run on a nightly schedule. So adding snapshots into that mix can give you a much finer recovery point objective throughout the day. And then this bottom tier of workloads, primarily file-based, but absolutely fastest growing and going to be the most difficult to protect. It's not uncommon for me to get a call from a city that's looking to roll out, you know, new body cameras for their officers, and they need to add 100 terabytes in the next, you know, couple of months to get this workload online. So, you know, storage requirements are absolutely exploding, and how do you deal with, you know, managing that type of growth in storage? When you're working with video, likely it's not going to be cost effective to look at a purpose-built backup appliance, just because, you know, a lot of dedicated backup appliances rely on deduplication technology. When it comes to video, your deduplication is going to be nil. So what I see most often here is really it's a secondary off-site replication and then longer snapshots at that secondary site just to maintain any kind of compliance or long-term retention type requirements. So I've spent the last, you know, couple of minutes showing my triangle, but really kind of what I want to drive home is, you know, there's not going to be a single solution for every workload. You know, each of your workloads have very different, you know, uptime and retention requirements. You know, you're likely not going to require the same amount of uptime on, you know, something like a video feed that you are on your 911 system. So this slide I'm going to walk through a scenario and kind of go through the different backup solutions that are available and what might happen in these different situations. So imagine some sort of corruption happens at 3:28 in the afternoon. Maybe it's topical. How about a ransomware attack hits, you know, in the afternoon? If your only form of backup is a nightly backup application, then, you know, you've lost an entire day's worth of work or worse. Anyone remember Kansas Heart Hospital being in the news last year? So they got a ransomware attack and paid the ransom. Well, I mean, you're dealing with criminals when it comes to ransomware. The criminals demanded even more money before unlocking their files. Just earlier this month, the city of Englewood, Colorado was in the news because they too were infected with ransomware. Because of their attack, they weren't able to process credit card payments, The library couldn't even put books on hold. I mean, it really crippled the city's infrastructure. I was working with a major retailer last year that was infected with ransomware. Several of their department chairs were infected, and I mean, they kind of had to halt work. But they augmented their nightly backup with array-based snapshots on a NAS, and then working with support, they were actually able to completely recover from this attack without paying the ransom within a few hours. When you're talking about hours of downtime or hours of lost data, a lot of times snapshots, just aren't able to cut it, and that's where continuous availability type solutions come into play. So with continuous availability, imagine being able to roll back your workloads to mere moments before the attack happened. And then finally is like a site-wide availability, and this is where I'm talking about like a stretch cluster technology. So whether it's power outage, something on the WAN, has gone down, or you've got water in your data center. These types of solutions are able to keep you up and running without you even logging in to initiate a failover. So this is kind of like the breadth of the continuum. Now I'm going to spend some time talking about specific products and where they fit and how you can implement them. So the data protection suite and data domain. The data protection portfolio from Dell EMC includes both like best-in-class hardware and software solutions to give you the most reliable backups in the industry. I think some of you might already be using data domain here. I talked to some folks last night that were. So data domain is the #1 purpose-built backup appliance worldwide. A lot of backup solutions are going to tout things like 5 or 6 to 1 space efficiency savings. Of over 80,000 data domain systems reporting home to Dell EMC in the United States right now, the average across all of those systems is 36 to 1. I was talking to someone last night that's getting 22 to 1 on their data domain system, even including their Laserfish environment. So I mean, absolutely like. So what does that mean? Like better dedupe ratios. So what? What that means to you is less disk, which brings your total cost of ownership way down on the solution. It also means longer retention times. I talk to folks that say they want to keep a week or 2 weeks or 7 years worth of data. Because of this type of dedupe that it's available on data domain, you're able to not only have a smaller footprint, but also longer retention to support all kinds of different compliance requirements. The data protection suite includes quite a few different software titles, and I'm going to just talk about a couple of them. So Avamar and Networker are 2 software solutions designed to run on a nightly backup schedule. So whether your environment is highly virtualized, entirely physical, or something in between, both Avamar and Networker are designed to give you best, like really the most reliable, most consistent backups in the industry. Even laptop, desktop environments, they have agents for your client systems as well. So really server and client can all be managed from a single tool when it comes to backup and recovery. Do any of you allow database administrators to manage their own backups? At least a couple people. A lot of times, whenever I'm talking to a DBA that wants to manage their own backup, their form of backup is another full copy on production storage. So one of the things that's included with the data protection suite is something called DD Boost for enterprise applications. And so what that does is allows your database administrators, whether it's SQL, Oracle, DB2, to leverage their native tools that they're already using, like within SQL Management Server Studio, and then send those backups, instead of creating additional copies on primary storage, directly to data domain disk. Another neat thing, how often do you get a call about a lost file? The someone calls in and they don't know what the file was called, they don't know what file server it was on, they don't know when it was deleted, they just know it's gone. Right? I mean, that's kind of something that I hear a lot. So if you're using snapshots, as your form of backup, what that means is, searching through numerous snapshots, mounting them all, trying to find, it's not a very efficient process to try to restore. Even if you've got a proper backup in place, maybe you're searching through countless backup jobs because, like I said, they didn't know what file server it was on or what the file was even called. So it's just not very efficient. DP search, or data protection search, it's a feature, is another feature included with the data protection suite. So what DP search does is if you are using Dell EMC software to store your file server backups, it gives you basically a Google page with a single search bar in the middle to search across all of your file backups. So DP search can either maintain just a metadata index, or you can do like full content indexing, and then does like just keyword search for files inside of backup jobs. So let's say you type Brian, it'll come up with tens of thousands of results. You can filter by file type, you can filter by user, date, so I mean you can get pretty granular to help find the correct file. But then once you do, it's role-based access, so even end users can use this tool to restore their own backups without giving them direct access into your backup applications. So they can preview the file, restore it to a new location, or just go ahead and restore it to the original location, all from within DP search. So if you've got like a senior backup administrator or someone that's tasked with doing too many other things and don't want to spend all your time like searching for these lost files, DP search drastically reduces time to do just that. So I mentioned Snapshots several times. Everyone is familiar with Snapshots. I mean, they've been available for decades. But Dell EMC has taken Snapshots a step further. Typically a snapshot is going to be crash consistent. Can you even read that, or is it super tiny? AppSync and Replay Manager, they're software titles designed to work with different backend storage arrays, but what they can do is integrate with applications, whether it's Microsoft, VMware, really, I mean, a whole host of applications, to quiesce the application to make sure that your snapshot is not only crash consistent, but also application consistent. Another one, Protect Point. Protect Point is a feature specific to VMAX and Extreme IO storage, but what it does is basically take snapshots from these like your production storage array, and send it directly to data domain disk. So if you had a backup job that took hours before, using Protect Point, that's literally done in seconds. Okay, some of my favorite ones. Recover Point has been available for over a decade, but I talked to a lot of people that still just never heard of it or not familiar with what it can do. When it was first released, Recover Point was designed to protect volumes protect workloads at the volume or LUN level. Recovery point objectives could be set 3 different ways. So either by the amount of time that's passed, by the amount of data that's changed, or even by individual write count. So if you have something that's that critical that you need to make sure that you can roll back individual writes, Recover Point installs a splitter to send those incoming writes to a journal volume. It's typically referred to as being like DVR-like because of the way that you're able to roll back workloads to mere moments before whatever the corruption was. So I said that it, for the first many years of its life, it was LUN or volume-based. So, if you're using really any kind of array-based technology today, like remote replication, and it replicates at the volume level, all of the virtual machines inside that volume are going to have the same recovery point objective. So if you've got synchronous replication set up, if you've got async that runs every hour, every 4 hours, once a day, you've got all of these different protection policies, but they're all volume-based. So if you make a new virtual machine, you've got to take a lot of care to make sure that it's on the right volume, so it gets the right level of protection, because you don't want to put your management tools and something that gets synchronous replications that's chewing up bandwidth that doesn't need to be there or be used that way. So using this recover point technology, they took it a step further and released recover point for virtual machines. So recover point for virtual machines is VMware only today, but there are future releases already scheduled for both Hyper-V and KVM support too. So what this does is instead of giving you that that ability to set RPOs like in those 3 different manners I mentioned before, instead of protecting at the LUN level, now you can set protection policies at the individual virtual machine level. It doesn't matter what the backend storage is. It can be internal disk, it can be external disk, iSCSI, fiber, NFS, whatever. It doesn't matter. Every single virtual machine can have its own protection policy, and it's completely storage agnostic. So maybe you've got applications that span multiple virtual machines, like some sort of like a web portal front end and middleware, and some big complex database on the back. Like I log into the city to pay my utility bills, and I kind of assume that that's how that application works. Well, with recover point for virtual machines, you can take all of these different. Is it?
I think it's just a, like,
It's not like a fire going on.
A database just crashed.
Korean sword kill.
Okay, so you can take all of those different virtual machines that kind of make up one application and group them together into a consistency group. So by creating these consistency groups, now you can ensure right order fidelity across multiple virtual machines to make sure that that application can come back online. That also means, I'll talk about that in a second. So, does anyone use Site Recovery Manager? So SRM is fantastic orchestration tool at remote, data center failover and failback. The problem with SRM though is it requires some other form of replication to work, whether that's a array-based replication or even like vSphere replication that's built into VMware now. But it's just multiple pieces that you have to manage and adjust to make sure that it's always working. Recover point for virtual machines, not only does it protect or manage the protection both local and remote, it can also be used to orchestrate failover, all from within a vCenter plugin. So some of the things that people like about SRM, if you're replicating over a layer 3 and you have to change IP addresses on the other site, recover point for virtual machines will automate that process. If you've got a specific boot order for virtual machines because you want things like a database to boot before an application, you can set boot order either within a consistency group or even across multiple consistency groups. So when it comes time, if you do need to log in and initiate a failover, recover point for virtual machines not only takes care of the replication, but also orchestrates the failover. And then for site-wide availability, there are a number of solutions I want to talk about, but first I want to talk about just some of the requirements. So when I talk about stretch clusters, it's a conversation that comes up more and more often. I just want to lay down a few kind of ground rules. First, any kind of site-wide availability solution is going to require significant amounts of bandwidth with very low tolerance for latency. I have seen these solutions deployed with as little as a gigabit of bandwidth between sites, but a lot of support documents are actually going to recommend 10 gigabit between sites with less than 5 milliseconds of round-trip latency. So that latency requirement is going to set a maximum distance at about 100 miles. So I worked with a company that did deploy this all the way from Oklahoma City to Tulsa, which is kind of pushing that 100-mile limit. But more often than not, I was working with another city that deployed a stretch cluster, and they have their primary production cluster at City Hall, and then they use a data center and a water treatment facility about 10 miles away for their replication target. So if you're looking for, disaster recovery in Tennessee, it's likely not going to be a synchronous type solution. Whether or not you've already researched hyperconverged infrastructure for your own data center, most folks, I think, have at least heard of it at this point. Back in June of this year, I know it's hard to read, but VxRail is what's listed on the top. So in June of this year, VxRail became the #1 hyperconverged solution by total market share. So VxRail was co-developed between Dell EMC and VMware, and it leverages vSAN to provide storage redundancy across nodes, and those same nodes that are providing CPU and memory resources. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what hyperconverged is. One of the many features that's included with VxRail is the ability to run a vSAN stretched cluster. So that's just a native capability within vSAN. What I see a lot of times is folks aren't ready to deploy a hyperconverged model quite yet because you probably have different refresh cycles between servers and storage. Since hyperconverged infrastructure is designed to really kind of eliminate the need for external storage, it's a harder adoption. So if you're already familiar with Davenport Group, you likely know about our relationship with Compellent. Compellent is now known as Dell EMC SC Storage, but I don't know if you're familiar with its native ability to provide stretch cluster active-active access with a feature called Live Volume. We do have Nicole Giza members already using Compellent to provide active-active access to their data across distance using SC Live Volume. In the VMAX line of storage, Dell EMC also came out with a feature called SRDF Metro that works very, very similarly. So when I say active-active, does that make sense to everyone? I mean, what I'm talking about is really the ability to have a single cluster span distance. So what that does is allows you to do things like vMotion from site A to site B. So if you want to do maintenance in the middle of the week instead of waiting until Sunday afternoon, now you can just move workloads all the way across sites. In a reactive situation, since it is all a single cluster with read-write access at both sites, things like VMware HA kick in. So if something unexpected does happen at site A, workloads will automatically reboot at the surviving site. So talked about VxRail Stretch Cluster, Live Volume, and SRDF Metro. Another one so EMC has actually been a leader in providing stretch cluster capabilities for a long time with this solution called vPlex. It's actually been out for over 7 years now. What vPlex is, it's a hardware appliance that sits kind of between hosts and storage to provide active-active access to that back-end storage. So your hosts now see vPlex as a storage array, and your storage array sees vPlex as the host. So it sits right there in the middle of the data path, but what that does is it allows it to work with really every single block storage array from Dell EMC and a whole host of third-party arrays. So whether, we won't get into the full list, but I mean, it's as long as it's iSCSI or fiber channel storage, I mean, odds are we can get it to work with vPlex, even if your array doesn't have that kind of native capability. One of the things I've seen with vPlex recently also is to do kind of like a local storage migration. So I've talked about that kind of remote, active-active access over the WAN, but also for a local refresh. Think of like a storage vMotion. Does anyone use storage vMotion? Or the problem with storage vMotion is it's very slow. I think it's still limited to 8 virtual machines at a time, and it's slow. I was working with a customer that had vPlex deployed, moving from one type of storage technology to a completely different company's back-end storage technology, but with vPlex in the middle, and they were able to move over 300 virtual machines. It was 50 terabytes worth of data in a few hours. I mean, that was done in a single Sunday. Storage vMotion, it would not have been possible. So I've kind of talked a lot about on-prem type solutions, but a conversation that comes up pretty frequently is, what about the cloud? First, when I say cloud, I don't just mean AWS, Azure, a lot of folks do have on-prem private clouds. Whether it's on-prem or public cloud, most of the solutions that I've just described plug right in. So if you've already running like a private cloud, protection policies with Avamar, with data domain, with vPlex, all of that can be automatically applied the moment new workloads are created, through a self-service portal, if you're doing an on-prem cloud. If you're doing something, off premises, Avamar and Networker are software first and foremost. If you have Windows and Linux instances running in the public cloud, these software solutions will give you the same capabilities in the public cloud as they do in your own data center. Even data domain. So data domain is a hardware appliance, but it recently came out with Data Domain Virtual Edition, which is exactly what it sounds like, that can be deployed in the public cloud as well. So to give you that kind of full capability to protect public cloud workloads as if they were on-prem. One of the other things I hear people talk about a lot is replicating to the cloud. So maybe you already have, a complete data center solution on-prem, but you just want a copy of your data offsite. Some of the features that are available in Data Domain, if you're using Data Domain as a backup target, one of the features is Cloud Boost. What Cloud Boost does is allows you to replicate your backup data directly from Data Domain to a whole number of public cloud providers. Another question is about long-term retention. So, if you want to keep 60 days worth of backup data on-prem, but you have a 7-year retention requirement, Cloud Tier is a solution that will really, it keeps your on-prem like 60 days, and then it will tier older data out to any number of public clouds. So a couple of options, both replication and tiering out to the cloud that are available already. But a new feature is called DD Cloud DR. And what that does is if you're using Dell EMC software writing to Data Domain, you can replicate those backups to Amazon S3, which is kind of their low-cost object storage tier. But then if you need to fail over workloads, you can convert those backups to running Amazon EC2 instances. So it's like, running VMware on-prem, fail over to EC2. And that's all made available through DD Cloud DR. One of the things, a lot of people talk about looking at the cloud because of cost. And they think it's going to be less expensive going to the cloud than it would be to build a second data center for sure, or even contracting with a colo space. An idea I'll plant now, and I don't know if maybe it's already more widespread than I know of, but I recently met with a Nickel GISA member that is pairing up with another Nickel GISA member to co-host each other's DR solutions. So, there's absolutely going to be a lot of things to consider, like network and security, but it's a way to lessen the cost of getting, a true business continuity solution. So that's something that is already happening within Nickel GISA now. And if it's something that, might be interested to you, then maybe allow us to facilitate an introduction. We'd be happy to do that. So I've talked a lot about, I've talked about a lot of different technologies. Some of them are probably new. So how do you get started? Where do you begin? Davenport Group has a proven methodology that we like to work through to make sure that you get the right solution for your business. And it starts with an assessment. So we'll talk to you about what you're doing today, what's working, what's not working. We'll talk to you about growth plans and what your objectives are. And then we'll probably run some sort of actual data scan to gather empirical data about your current environment. We can run scans against a number of current backup softwares to see what your backup windows are. If you're having challenges around backup windows, or how much capacity you're going to need in a new backup solution. After we've gathered all of this information, we'll collaborate with you to design a solution that will work for your company, for your government. You know, it's your job to kind of maintain the technology offerings available to your citizens. It's our job to kind of stay up to date on what's going on in the technology landscape. You know, so I mean, this is what we do every single day is design these complex solutions and make them easy for you. But once we've kind of designed, collaborated and designed a solution together, oftentimes, you know, when you receive like a proposal, it's up to you to kind of sell it up the stream and see if you can get, you know, get it approved. We try to make this process easier for you by developing, you know, total cost of ownership and return on investment paperwork, and even kind of compare the cost of the investment versus your current business as usual plan. We'll kind of explain what your current situation is and why we believe that the proposed solution is the best fit going forward. So these types of documents just are there to help make it easier for you to, you know, get support through budgeting. The next step is implementation and training. So, you know, our job doesn't stop. You know, when you sign the purchase order, we have certified engineers that will work, you know, with you to schedule out an implementation timeline, and then come on site for a full white glove treatment. You know, a lot of the technologies I just talked about might be brand new. I mean, if it's something you've never worked with before. It's always a part of our process to make sure that we train you on the solution, you know, to make sure that you will be successful day to day. You know, a lot of our company or a lot of our customers experience turnover from time to time. One thing that we like to do at Davenport Group is continued training. You know, it's not uncommon for us to go back out to, you know, one of our customers where, you know, we did some of the installation work to train someone new, you know, to make sure that you stay up and running even in the event of turnover. And kind of the final step in that process is validation. Whether it's 6 months or a year after we've installed the solution, we'd like to come back and you know, run some reports to kind of show you that, you know, this new backup and business continuity solution is doing exactly what we said it would. You know, I love it when I see these validation reports, because some of the sizing, you know, it'll come back and it'll say, you know, expect 20 to 1 type deduplication savings, and then we look at, you know, what the actual results are, and it's closer to 50 to 1. You know, I talked to customers that had backup windows that just weren't being met. You know, certain backup jobs were taking hours. But now, you know, in these validation reports, we're able to review with them that those troublesome backup jobs from before are now completed in minutes. So it's just it's a fun thing for us to come back and do. That's really kind of all I had. I think I'm doing okay on time, but I wanted to leave some time for questions. So if you have a question about, you know, anything I talked about, anything I didn't talk about, or talk about, yes.
Did you have any of your clients that moved to the cloud solution have to change their bandwidth to accommodate to?
Yeah. So, man, that's such a loaded question when it comes to cloud. So I mean, if you're talking about running application, like, you know, I talk to people that want to completely move into the cloud, like all workloads. The problem with doing something like that is a lot of workloads are going to be latency sensitive, and sometimes it's difficult. Like if you're running in a cloud, I know they have regions, and I mean, you can kind of try to figure out, you know, get your latency sensitive applications running in the same data center, but there are a lot of networking considerations. But yes, if you move everything from on-prem out to a public cloud, then yeah, a lot of times you might need to increase your bandwidth. And I know that can be challenging for some of the folks that are in remote areas. We've got some scans that we can run against your current environment that will look at like read-write ratios and kind of figure out your IOPS to get, you know, kind of what your traffic might look like, to do some modeling that way. But even if it's something, if it's like you want to be able to replicate backups out to the cloud, like on a nightly schedule, I mean, that's a more straightforward math problem. You know, we'll figure out what your nightly backup is, and you know, it's a long division at that point. Some cloud providers actually have a way to do a local seed, where they will send you some sort of hardware where we can replicate to that first, and then you will use that instead of, like, you know, if you've got 40 terabyte environment and you start, you know, your upload today, and that's going to finish never. So I mean that's, you know, when we'll get into some of these like seeding type options. So I've seen that leveraged as well. But then, you know, we get into what your kind of every night what your bandwidth requirements would be, and do some math to figure out if it's going to work. One of the awesome things, I mean, about data domain, so I mean, if you're using data domain as your kind of purpose-built backup appliance and then replicating that to the cloud, is anything that goes to the cloud is still going to be deduplicated and compressed. So, you know, if it's 40 terabytes up front, it's only going to be a fraction of that actually gets sent out to the cloud. Anybody else? Molly said she would dance.
I'm not a dancer, Mary was here to sing.
Great. I mean, I really appreciate you all coming out this morning. So thank you. I'll be at booth 37 the rest of the day. If you want to come by and chat, or, you know, we can set up some time later for me to come by. Thank you.